So my name is Sandra Macpherson. I'm an associate professor in the English department. My area of specialization is 18th century British literature and culture. I'm primarily, I think, seen as an historian of the novel, but I also teach classes in critical theory, feminist theory, gender and sexuality, and I teach classes on film as well. So I'm an historian of the novel primarily, and it might make sense to suggest things like Homer's Odyssey or Cervantes' Don Quixote or Samuel Richardson's Pamela. But as I thought more about it, I thought that actually I would want to choose an essay rather than a novel or a book. And that would be the first chapter from Michel Foucault's Les Mots et les Choses, which is translated as The Order of Things. It's an essay called Las Meninas, and it's essentially a close reading of a painting by Diego Velázquez called Las Meninas. And I don't know if you can see it, but you'll recognize the painting. It's got the handmaid, the princess here and the handmaids here. And Foucault does this elaborate sort of paraphrase of the painting and notices things in it that we haven't noticed before, and that sort of develops into this virtuosic close reading of the poem, which is also a sort of theoretical meditation on representation and on interpretation, and it is just this perfect work for teaching students how to ask questions, how to look critically, and how to read critically. It's gorgeous. Well, I think I was a bit of a slacker myself as an undergraduate, so I have a great deal of patience for that mode. But one of the things that interests me is the overachievement of the professor. One's own battles with overachieving. It's just, I think we have this cultural inheritance. I call it the Dead Poets Society syndrome, where everyone, yourself included, expects to have their world rocked as soon as they walk into a classroom and get up on the tables and quote Whitman, and that often doesn't happen, and you come home from class feeling depressed and that they didn't have a good day, they weren't enjoying themselves. And so I've had to, over the years, sort of teach myself to find those things that I did give them that day. Like I did teach them something about sonnet form, or I did produce a fairly decent close reading of that film, and someday that will catch up with them. Because when I think back to what I was like as an undergraduate, a lot of things you learn, you don't understand for a while. It wasn't until my 30s when I sort of understood what some of my undergraduate professors were on about. And so it's a very, very delayed temporality, but I'm a first-generation college student. I really believe in the value of education. I believe you get smarter, and it just can take time. That one's actually easy. It was Edmund Burke, the great Irish statesman and writer. I had, graduated from the University of Alberta, which is sort of Canada's version of Ohio State. I was backpacking around Europe. I was working when I got back in an art gallery, and I was reading a ton, but it felt like my brain was sort of getting fuzzy. So I went back to take some classes, one of which was a class on Burke and Samuel Johnson, the two great stylists of English literature. And I just absolutely fell in love with Burke as a writer. The sort of periodic sentences, the parallelism, these sentences that don't end until the very end of the sentence. I thought of one: toleration is good for all, or it is good for none. That's a sort of classic Burkean sentence. So then I went on to do a master's on Burke, and rest is history. I think because I was a first-generation college student, the idea of being a professor wasn't something on my radar. I mean, they all seemed like creatures from another planet to me. And so even though I'd gotten a master's degree, I was somewhat clueless about how to go about the next step, or even that there was a next step. But I applied to only 2 graduate programs, and was thinking I might go and work in a flower shop or work as a caterer. But miraculously I got in. I mean, I really think a lot of one's life path ends up being accidental, and in my case, really series of really fortunate accidents. But I still sometimes think like I might like to, chuck it all and teach kindergarten, or one of my friends recently suggested a personal shopper, which that would be fun. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really reading and teaching is the only thing for which I'm equipped, and luckily there's a job for that, or at least there is now. I sometimes worry that higher education is changing so much it won't be a career path available to my children or grandchildren. Bookish kids of the future, and that makes me sad. But then catastrophic climate change makes me sad, so it might not be a career future for anyone. I think sort of instinctively I would rather read. I always tend to write under pain of like duress or public shame. I have a deadline, I have a talk I have to give. But once you get into it, once you're like in the zone trying to figure out something complicated, there's deep pleasure in it. And I think a lot of us are sort of masochistic that we, that part of the pleasure is the threat of shame and is the difficulty, and but it sort of depends on how my brain is working. Lately I have on my bedside table some long novels that I've been starting and just unable to finish. Not because I don't like them, I do, like Hilary Mantel's Bringing Up the Bodies, or I've been rereading Middlemarch. So it just sort of depends what I'm capable of. And right now I seem more capable of catching up on episodes of Louis than George Eliot. So I'm Canadian, and when I moved from Edmonton, Alberta to do my master's at McGill University, I had to drive across the country. And that entailed driving the 3 days in like absolutely empty evergreen forest north of Lake Superior. And I think I'd be happy never to do that again. I tend to prefer the desert. But most places I've ever visited, as long as they're filled with people and creatures and things, they keep my interest. I'm sure others have said this, and it's probably a well-worn claim, but I really think in this case size matters. I look at the course catalogs every year and see what my amazing colleagues are teaching, and or I go and I participate in the Denman Undergraduate Forum and see what the undergrads are doing with their research. And I just wish I could go back in time and take film classes, or take a course in paleobotany. I didn't even know that was a thing. And probably wasn't when I was an undergrad. And I think the size is also a real boon for professors as well. I mean, because the department's so big, I can teach things out of my area of specialization. So I can teach a course in second wave feminist film, or I can teach a course on the major works of Sigmund Freud. And I think students benefit from that, because many of us are teaching classes that we are teaching for the first time, and so we're learning along with the students, we're learning as we teach, and that's the real joy of this environment, is getting to be a student for the rest of your life.